archaeology accepts that the Great Pyramid is constructed of about 2.5 million of stone blocks. And they say it was constructed within 20 years. If you divide 2.5 million of stone blocks within 20 years, it would make that every year they had to cut, to polish, to put on place, to transport 120,000 stone blocks. If you take an year with 300 working days, which is a good year because they had some festivities too, and you take a working day of 12 hours, then they had, in fact, to make this whole thing every 2 minutes, one block. Repeat it today with our technology. How?
Yet, even using very simple tools and methods, 1 or 2 men can easily break out a stone the size of those used in the pyramids. It takes about 15 minutes. The soft limestone splits easily, and usually along straight lines. The ancient Egyptians would have used wooden wedges, but the principle is the same. In ancient Egypt, 10 men could easily have broken out about a dozen such stones in a week, and been able to maneuver them from the quarry without any great difficulty. With 100,000 men, that would produce 120,000 stones in a season's quarrying, the figure needed to keep the pyramid building on schedule. Speculation is one thing, but facts are another. And in Egypt, von Daniken gets most of his facts wrong. Buried deep in the remote Mexican jungle lie the ruined temples and palaces of a vanished civilization, that of the Maya. Here at Palenque in the 7th century A.D., the Indians of the sophisticated Mayan culture built a great ceremonial center. This is the Temple of Inscriptions. Beneath it lies one of von Daniken's major pieces of evidence. It is a huge sarcophagus lid in an underground burial chamber. Elaborately carved, it depicts what? Von Daniken interprets it in this way.
There sits a human being with the upper part of his body bent forward like a racing motorcyclist. Today, any child would identify his vehicle as a rocket. It is pointed at the front, then changes to strangely grooved indentations like inlet ports, widens out and terminates at the tail in a darting flame. The crouching being himself is manipulating a number of undefinable controls and has the heel of his left foot on a kind of pedal. His clothing is appropriate. Short trousers with a broad belt, a jacket with a modern Japanese opening at the neck, and closely fitting bands at arms and legs. With our knowledge of similar pictures, we should be surprised if the complicated headgear were missing. And there it is with the usual indentations and tubes and something like antennae on top. Our space traveler, he is clearly depicted as one, is not only bent forward tensely, he is also looking intently at an apparatus hanging in front of his face.
Could this startling interpretation that the slab depicts an astronaut be a valid one? Ian Graham of Harvard University is an expert on Mayan symbols. His interpretation of the carving on the slab is quite different from von Daniken's. The siting of the tomb is unusual. No other Mayan temple has a staircase like this one leading into the heart of the building. It took 4 years to excavate this stairway. At the bottom, a stone slab concealed the doorway to an impressive tomb. Inside was the Palenque sarcophagus. Nothing as elaborate as this had ever before been found. The tomb slab was raised. Below it was a sealed coffin. When this was opened, it revealed the skeleton of a man richly adorned with jade ornaments. Hieroglyphics on the tomb identified him as Pakal, a 7th century ruler. This is his funeral monument. Ian Graham.
Well, I certainly don't see any need to regard him as a spaceman. I don't see any oxygen tubes. I see a very characteristically drawn Maya face with the sloping forehead, which is rather common among the Maya, although sometimes it's been exaggerated by deformation during early childhood. And this is crowned by an elaborate hairdo and elements of headdress. Here, an earring suspended from a pierced ear, a nose plug, which has the elements of death because it takes the form of a fleshless bone. Here on his chest, he has a jeweled pectoral ornament suspended by a chain, the end of which flares out, or rather a beaded cord. On his wrists, there is a very typical bracelet. Around his waist, a beaded belt with a death head in front, and a beaded skirt, which is not at all unusual, and anklets likewise.
And the hand on the rocket's controls?
As a matter of fact, it's fairly plain that this hand isn't holding on to anything. The Maya like to show hands in rather delicate gestures, many of which may have had meanings which so far escape us. I think this is just a delicate position of the hand.
Such gestures are common in Mayan art. There are similar examples on the side of the slab. But what about the rocket flames at the base?
These famous flames from the rocket have quite a different explanation, because we see, for instance, this element down here as consisting of 2 serpent heads uniting in the bottom.
Here's the design. 2 serpents joined at the middle, whose beards form von Daniken's rocket flames. According to Ian Graham, the Maya stylized the serpent from a simple design. Eventually, the serpent's jaw became a rigid shape, with a stylized beard below the lower jaw. The jaw is open. It forms the shape used in the design around the base of the slab when paired with its mirror image. By removing the elements, the Mayan design on the royal slab becomes clear. There is the Mayan symbol of kingship, a double-headed serpent. Below it lies the dead ruler himself. And finally, the 2 serpents that form the base. This leaves, on top, a bird symbolizing heaven. A cross-shaped device, the Mayan saber tree, supporting heaven. And below, a grotesque earth monster, symbol of the underworld. The important point is that these symbols are found in other examples of Mayan art and are common throughout the Maya world. They have been studied for 50 years, and they tell a consistent story.
I am absolutely familiar myself with the archaeological explanation, but I do not agree. I know for sure we have, in the case of the Palenque slab, a lot of designs, carvings, or what archaeologists call glyphics, which we know from other Maya places. But the question I have is, have they been interpreted from the very beginning correctly? You know, archaeology, in my opinion, is one of the very conservative sciences. And I do not doubt, not at all, the integrity or the honesty of any archaeologist. But I ask myself, do they interpret their findings correct? To me, the Palenque stone still today looks like a modern man sitting in some kind of technical apparatus. We have never found in the whole Maya literature a man sitting in the same position. That's for the first and the only time. So I hope we should wait until we find another guy like this.
I see no need at all to invoke any really extreme and extravagant interpretation involving astronauts, when the so much simpler and more consistent explanation presents itself of a mere mortuary slab showing the deceased in his passage towards heaven, the Maya heaven.
Another startlingly modern interpretation is given to the mysterious lines on the Nazca Desert in Peru. Von Däniken writes,
You can make out gigantic lines, laid out geometrically, some of which run parallel to each other while others intersect. The archaeologists call them Inca roads, a preposterous idea. Seen from the air, the clear-cut impression they made on me was that of an airfield.
In fact, no modern archaeologist claims the lines are roads. The only real road on the desert is the Pan American Highway. And as the lines often run for miles, cross hills, and go over the edges of cliffs, it is a strange pattern for a spaceport.
You effortlessly cross hundreds of light years of interstellar space. The space vehicle sets down on the ground, the great bay opens, and out wheel what? B-24 Liberators, Spitfires? Most remarkable that they need airfields. And that is a kind of temporal chauvinism, which the whole subject is immersed in, unfortunately.
I never said that the extraterrestrial needed runways with concrete or something like this. My idea, which I developed in my second book and also in the book In Search of Ancient Gods, the picture book, was that some vehicle was coming down, not an interstellar spaceship, simply a small vehicle, and landing with an effect maybe even of the air cushion system. So they don't need landing tracks, but simply by the landing itself, some sand and stones are blown away, and you have a simple track on the ground. And after maybe a few hours or a few days, they start again, maybe in another direction, you have a second track, the take-off track. I assumed that only later, when the extraterrestrials departed, the natives came to the ground and saw these two lines, landing track and take-off track, and they would whisper, the fiery gods rode on these lines. And only now they start to protect the lines, to construct the lines, and maybe in the later generations to make new lines to the east and west and north and south, some direction to stars, because they feel or they saw that the gods have come from the stars. So the interpretation of mine is not lines with concrete, as on a 2 days airfield, but it was a landing, yes. I still suggest this.
But there is another explanation of the lines. It comes from someone who has spent a lifetime studying them. The German scientist Maria Reiche. For over 35 years, working virtually alone and unaided, Maria Reiche has walked almost every foot of the Nazca Desert, measuring and calibrating the shapes in the sand. The Nazca Desert is covered with small rocks that have oxidized to a purplish-brown color. The sand underneath is yellow. And it's this contrast in color that was used by the Nazca people 1,000 years ago to make the lines.
They pushed away the dark stones from the surface to the borders, where you can see an accumulation of larger stones, and left a surface which in former times was much lighter than now. The wind has carried from the surrounding surface very small dark pebbles over the lines, and if we sweep away these dark pebbles, then we restore a line to its original very white light color. You can see the lines are absolutely straight, and people have wondered very often how the ancient people could do these straight lines without any engineering instruments. I had an interesting experience which gave me the clue to this. I had a helper who had been a furrow tracer, which means a man who prepares